each other. Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for coming for to this monthly meeting. I know it's a little bit different because we are doing the meeting on a different day of the week that we normally do it, at least a different week. So it's a little bit maybe a little confusing, but I appreciate you guys joining us today. We have a great speaker coming up, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But first and foremost, I just want to let you guys know that, again, this is a space of collaboration. Unlock Higher Education exists for the purpose of that, of having the experts in the industry, the experts in the field, the boots on the ground, come together and discuss, what is happening in their community, what is happening in their space, what is happening in their state level, what's even happening at the federal level. So we discuss these best practices so that we hope that everybody can learn and be at the same playing field. And if not, how we can help those that are not at the same playing field or at the same level push forward to be in the same unity. So this is, again, a space of collaboration. And because of that, we're always looking for people to participate, for people to bring in their expertise and bring in their voice, whether it's lived experience or other experiences that we have turned the page on, right? Because at the end of the day, it takes all voices to come to the table for change to actually happen. So we can't be one lopsided. And with that, I thank you guys for, again, joining. I am not going to go into breakout rooms. If we want to have a few of, just regular introductions, we have a couple of you on today. So I'll start with me. I'm Judith Negron. I am the policy team lead for Unlock Higher Education. I've been doing this for a little bit over 2 years now. Super excited to get this group going, growing. We have over 400, I think it was, last I checked, it was like 500 something members. They don't all come together, and our hope is to be able to record these meetings so that they can always look back and see what it is that we are, headed towards. And one of the things that I will discuss later on today is our new initiative that I'm really, really excited about, and hope that we can get you guys aspirations as well as, input and support into that collaborative. But again, I'm Judith Negron. I am in Miami, Florida, so it's a really tough state, if you can imagine. This is why my lifeline is places like this and platforms like this, where it can let me know what is going on in the nation, because I tell you, we're not a different state, we're just a different country altogether. So this is the way that I can be informed, and I can bring it to my community, and hopefully, bring the steps forwards into this journey that we're really, really kind of far behind on. And that's my spiel. I'll pass it on to Mickey.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mickey. I'm from Lafayette, Indiana. I am the chairperson or the chair for the media and messaging part of Unlock Higher Education. It is my privilege to work across social medias, the website, different blogs, producing videos, and publicizing Unlock Higher Education and its messaging. And occasionally I like to come out and throw out some creative designs. I think it's extremely important for us to look back and see stories like Les Mis, where 300 years ago, they were still having problems giving people a second path, a chance, and educating them. And we think about it, when we translate it, Jean Valjean is nothing more than John, son of John, because it's letting you know that everybody is affected by this. And the fact that somebody chased that man around for something like 7 books, and yes, I read all 7 books, and chased him around and stopped him from making changes and making things better for society. We still have to continue this fight. We still have to continue this arguments. We still have to be in the rooms where our voices can ring forward. And for me, at least, that is extremely, extremely important for us to work together in order to get that cause. With that being said, I'll pass it off. Ruth, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, please. Thank you. I'm Ruth Delaney. I'm the Initiative Director at the Vera Institute of Justice for what we call Unlocking Potential, which is where we group together all of the work that we do about advancing post-secondary education in prison and for people who are formerly incarcerated or justice impacted. And I'm so pleased to be here to speak with you today about Pell reinstatement, where we are with that, what the status is at the federal level, and what we're seeing nationally through our role at Vera as the designated technical assistance provider for Second Chance Pell. So given that we've got a nice, you know, a small dedicated group here today, I thought I could say a little bit and then maybe we could have more of a conversation about what's coming up so that we can take this in the directions that you're all most interested to hear about. But I wanted to start, just for those of you who are not as familiar with the background on Pell Grants in general and how we got to the big victory in 2020 that put Pell Grants back into the mix for people who are in prison. And then I'll be able to say a little bit about where the field is and what we're seeing as the outlook with the current budget reconciliation bill that is moving through Congress. So to give you the background, Pell Grants, initially they were called Basic Education Opportunity Grants, and they were invented back in the 1970s and then renamed for Senator Claiborne Pell of Rhode Island, who was a big advocate for education. When they were first created, incarcerated people were always intended to be eligible for them. And they were from that time that they started until 1994, when the Omnibus Crime Bill passed through Congress and eliminated that eligibility. But all through that time when they were first available, you know, there was reasonably good data, there was reasonable high enrollment. We saw people going to college, and it appeared to be having an impact. And unfortunately, during that whole tough on crime wave that really picked up in the 70s and flourished in the 80s and continued into the 90s, we saw this kind of more punitive approach come into our public policy related to crime, justice, and how we operate prisons. And so one of the policies that was a victim to that ideology was Pell eligibility for people in prison. So in 1994, we saw that curtailed and ended. And to just note the impact, well, to just say for a minute what anyone who has tried to go to a higher education institution in the United States probably already knows, which is that if you can't pay for it yourself or get somebody else to pay for it on your behalf, you can't go to college in the United States. So we have various different mechanisms for that. You can kind of pay through your own means. Some people have parents who are able to pay. Some people take out loans. And then we have, there are scholarships, and then we have federal financial aid, including the Pell Grants, which enable people who who are kind of means tested to not have the means to be able to pay for college in prison. They have a defined need to be able to receive this federal grant money to go to college. Some of the history of the Pell Grant, which is kind of interesting, has to do with the space race. If you ever are curious about that, you can look it up, but it had to do with worries that the United States was falling behind during the Cold War in whether we could compete with our kind of like overall level of education within our population. So that's kind of where we were in 1994. There were somewhere between 400 and 800 programs that were operating nationwide in all different states. I believe I don't have the number of people enrolled at my fingertips, so I won't guess. But the next year after Pell was ended in 1994, there were 12 programs. So you can see how without an ability to pay for college, colleges stopped being able to offer programs in prison. People in prison, of course, as many of you know, or perhaps all of you know, they have no real means to earn money. The jobs that are available tend to pay pennies per hour. So there's no real opportunity for anyone to kind of do that, like pay yourself through college mechanism that we sometimes see in the community. So without Pell eligibility, college and prison more or less ended, except for a couple of instances where programs were philanthropically supported, some states that were able to maintain contracts with colleges in order to keep the program going. Ohio is one of those that kind of found a way to make it happen through state contracted money. Washington State followed suit. But for the most part, it both disappeared and went underground because there was this sense that if people knew that this was happening, it would be canceled or taken away. So then through the 90s and into the early 2000s, we saw kind of this change in attitude among conservative lawmakers where they started gravitating towards what we now refer to as evidence-based practices or programs that reduce recidivism. And this was termed the right on crime movement or the smart on crime movement, which you may have heard of. But we saw big reforms in places like Texas that were really looking to change state laws in order to reduce recidivism. They were seeing kind of this revolving door of prison. We had a couple of financial crises, first the dot-com bubble in 2000, 2001, and then later the much larger financial crisis in the 2007, 8, 9 period, where states' revenue just went way down. And they were looking at their budgets and saying, wow, how, prison is now one of the top things that I have to pay for, and I don't have the tax dollars to do that. So what else can I do? And so we saw all kinds of interesting innovations happening at the state level during this period, really stemming from conservative lawmakers who were interested in reducing recidivism, getting people out of prison quicker, getting them back on their feet and less likely to come back to prison. And one of the great things is that college and prison is one of those things that does all of that stuff that kind of appeals to evidence-based lawmakers. So we were able, Vera and others in the field, particularly advocates on this call, folks, I think, are probably pretty familiar with the Barred Prison Initiative, but them serving as kind of like a real beacon for how, quality programs could be offered. The Mount Tam program in California, another great example. So we had kind of like some really good programs that had been able to survive during this period and make the case for why this was a valuable program to continue. Vera kind of got involved in this work in 2011 and 12, where we were asked by the Gates Foundation to administer a 3-state national pilot that would test college and prison. Do people enroll? What kinds of challenges do you run into? What does it take to build a decent program? And so we got involved in that, and that kind of brought us into conversations with the U.S. Department of Education, which then in 2016 launched the Second Chance Pell Experimental Sites Initiative. So this was a huge, huge step forward. It really can't be understated, like how impactful this pilot project, not Vera's pilot project, but the Second Chance Pell pilot project is. An experimental sites initiative, it's kind of a technical term that the U.S. Department of Education uses, where they tweak something about federal financial aid policy that is currently in law. And they say, what if this law was changed? What would be the impact? And so some of you may be familiar with things like dual enrollment, where a student is enrolled in high school and college at the same time. That started as an experimental sites initiative program. So it's like a little policy pilot kind of thing that the Department of Education can do with different kinds of issues. And so they decided to do one of these about the ineligibility of incarcerated people. So they said, what if we tweaked this? And we said, just for the colleges that we accept into this pilot program, that barrier, we just pretend it doesn't exist. We like waive it for the pilot participants. And one of the first things that they found is that there was a lot of interest. So the first year, and that was one of the things they wanted to test, like would anybody actually enroll if we set up a program of this type? And so the first year they issued the RFP, they got more than 200 applicants, and they accepted, I think in the end it was 69 colleges. And so right from the beginning, and those colleges represented 27 states. Or 28 states, I think. And so right from the beginning, it was kind of a success right at the start because there was just so much interest. Like experimental sites do not typically get that many participants. And we had signed on with the Department of Ed to be the technical assistance provider. And so what we were doing as Vera was kind of going out trying to connect with these colleges and bring to them what kind of this collective field had learned about running a quality program in prison. So we looked, both to that pilot we had done with the 3 states, Michigan, New Jersey, and North Carolina, and to other really quality programs that were operating all over the country, who had kind of found a way to survive during this difficult time in funding. So our goal was to get these programs running, to make sure that that the programs were operating in a way that benefited students always and was not set up as a program to make the college money, for example, as the primary goal, but rather to deliver education. What we found in doing the technical assistance is that the number one thing colleges needed help with was, one, processing financial aid in prison. Without figuring that step out, there's kind of no way forward to run your program because you don't have any students who are enrolled, who are paying tuition, who are able to actually take your classes. So that's the first barrier, is figuring out financial aid. And then the second, which is kind of a very important step, as many of you I'm sure know, is developing a good collegial relationship with the Department of Corrections. Those are really the 2 things that perpetually come up in these kinds of setups. We occasionally ran into a college program that had actually never spoken to their Department of Corrections when they applied to be part of the pilot, and just kind of assumed that they'd be welcomed with open arms, only to find out, for example, the facility they wanted to work in was a work release place and there was no classrooms. Things like that would kind of happen where there was this lack of communication, or assumptions about how many people would be eligible for the program, only to find out that this is a place that does not have a lot of people who have completed high school or the equivalent. And so there wasn't as many students who would be ready to enroll in college. More recently, some of the surprises have come to schools around lack of technology infrastructure, and the inability to do online courses in any kind of scaled way. But so, drawing on the expertise of folks who were very knowledgeable about this, our job was to kind of link up all these programs, get them talking to each other, make sure that kind of innovations that happened in one place get carried to another place. So someone who figured out a quirk of how to run the FAFSA really well in prison, we maybe hold a webinar, just kind of bring that guidance around to all of our other partners, so that the whole community could learn from the advancements of individual colleges. The program was so successful that the Department of Education then expanded it 2 times. So it was launched under the Obama administration in 2016. It was expanded under the Trump administration early in calendar year 2020. And then it was expanded again by the Biden administration in 2022. So all along, it's had this really interesting bipartisan appeal. And we've certainly seen that in the states that participate. Now that we're kind of with all these 3 waves of Second Chance Pell programs that are part, there are programs in, at this moment, I believe 48 states, the Bureau of Prisons in Puerto Rico. The states where we're looking to get programs going are Alaska. There was a recently closed program in Alabama, which leaves them with a college and prison program, but not one that's Pell eligible. And then the other place is North Dakota. So there's 3 that Alabama is a recent one that is looking to find a way forward. So one of the things that kind of indicates this bipartisan support for this program is just these programs exist in every single political context that you can imagine in almost every state. And the places where the programs don't exist, it's not because the Department of Education, the Department of Corrections or the college don't want to do it, it's that they haven't found a viable path forward yet. So we fully expect programs in Alaska, and we know that North Dakota already has some things moving to be able to get a Pell eligible program in the next year or so. So while all of that was going on, we collaborated at Vera with Unlock Higher Ed and other advocates in the field to make the case for Pell reinstatement to be permanent, drawing on the success of Second Chance Pell and still some of those independent programs that had decided to kind of move forward with philanthropic or other funding or strategies that they've been able to work out. We look to collaborate across the field to kind of bring the message to Congress that this is a winning issue, that everybody wants this to happen, every state wants it to happen. There's so many reasons to support this work. There's really no reason not to. And so some of the things we did during the campaign were and so we launched a federal campaign in, I think, 2018. We really got it going. You know, initially with the 2016 election, we worried that there wouldn't be interest in the White House with the first Trump administration to do this work. And we found that not at all to be the case, that was an assumption we were making. And actually, there was good interest in the Trump administration the first time around to pursue expansions of college and prison. One of the things we did, we collaborated with the Department of Education right when Secretary Betsy DeVos came into her position in the Department of Education, to go on a site visit and to see some of these programs up close. And from then on, she became a champion for college and prison generally, and especially Pell-supported college and prison. So kind of once we had the sense that there was interest, we worked with our national partners to do different congressional visits, place op-eds, meet with different agency officials to kind of work out, you know, what would be the best way to do this? What kind of language are we really advocating for here? And in the late 2020, so after President Trump had expanded Second Chance Pell for the first time, in late 2020, he actually signed the bill into law that reinstated Pell for all incarcerated people. It was a big victory for so many reasons, but one of the most important ones is that during the pilot project, there had been a limit on who could participate. They had kind of kept language, because remember I said before it was about like tweaking policy language, and they had kept a prohibition on people who were serving life without parole or death sentences from participating in the pilot. And what was very exciting about the legislation that passed, that President Trump signed, is that was removed. So now every person in prison could go to college, could be eligible for a Pell Grant, assuming that they met all the other requirements for such. So it really is kind of like an open door to anybody in prison who would like to enroll. The legislation also created a challenging, well, that's probably not the right word, but a fairly rigorous process for colleges to actually get approved to become Pell eligible. And this is where some folks that participate in Unlock Higher Ed might be interacting with this legislation at this point, which is around like, how does my college become Pell eligible? Or how do I advocate for someone, another college or a partner, to kind of go down this route? And I will say it is complex, it is doable. The reasons for it are to create protections for incarcerated students, again, to avoid and keep out programs that would be looking to just exploit incarcerated students for their Pell money. Unfortunately, there is a sector of the higher ed field that operates that way, and we believe that incarcerated students would be uniquely vulnerable to them. So there are many steps you have to do. I hope that you will do them with that thought in mind, that as frustrating as they might be, they are there as kind of guardrails to protect incarcerated students. So since the law was signed in 2020, it took effect on July 1st of 2023. We're now in May of 2025. And the Department of Education has released publicly the names of 21 colleges operating more than 60 college programs in prison who are newly Pell eligible through the legislation. There's a bit of a slow start to it because there were so many pieces of the legislation to kind of get in place before any approvals could happen. But we're hearing from our partners at the Department of Ed that there are still many colleges coming through that approval process. So while they haven't shared more public information about how many more programs there are, we fully expect that list to be longer the next time they're able to update it. So in the meantime, what we've been doing at Vera has been around working with the different entities that are tasked with implementing different pieces of the legislation. So for a college to become Pell eligible, the first thing you have to do is to get approval from the Department of Corrections in your state, or if you want to work in the federal system, the Bureau of Prisons. If you are working in Puerto Rico, then it would be the entity that oversees prisons in that state. And I actually have a colleague right now who is hosting a summit of colleges based in Guam and the surrounding islands. So that's very exciting because people who live there are eligible for Pell. And so their incarcerated folks would also be eligible for Pell. So whoever is kind of like the person who oversees, or the entity that oversees all of the prisons or all of the facilities that you're trying to work in, that's who you go to. And at this point, every single one of those systems, I would say Guam and those folks may still be figuring this out, but they have a system in place that would enable them to approve you. So you would kind of like go, they'll have some kind of application process, something that they want you to produce for them. And then they would review that and say, yes, we approve your program. And that's step one. The second step, you take your application to your college's accreditor. They will have a special process that they want you to go through. It's part of their substantive change process. If you don't know how that works or who to talk to, your college, if you're at a college, will have an accreditor liaison. There's someone at the college whose job it is to communicate with the college's accreditor. So you would go to that person and say, we're starting a prison education program. Can you help us get the right paperwork? And then you kind of go through that substantive change process with the accreditor. And then once you're done with that, the last thing you have to do is submit that record and answer a couple additional questions for the Department of Education through what they call their e-app system. So a person on your college campus who probably administers that is your financial aid administrator. There's usually only about one person who really logs into that system on a regular basis. So you want to get some cross-campus engagement. The filling out the approval form from the Department of Ed can be tedious. It's something that you might need to sit down next to the financial aid administrator to do together to make sure the attachments are all set up properly. And while you're doing, if you want to know more about how to do that, there's a great set of materials and webinars from the National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, or NASFA. Really great guides, including like a video walkthrough where they say, use this drop-down menu and attach this here and do this and that. So you really can get guidance step by step. Once you have that in place, your next big challenge, like I mentioned, is to figure out how to enroll anybody in the prison. At this point, given that we know that there are college programs operating in almost every single state, and if they're not in your state, they're in a neighboring state, one of the best ways to get started is to find a college who's already doing this and to say, like, what advice do you have for me? How do I go about filing a paper FAFSA at a prison setting? Because at this moment, Department of Education is only accepting paper FAFSAs for incarcerated people. So there's such a rich community nationwide, so much knowledge that's been built up, at this point in the last, almost 10 years, so since Second Chance Pell started in 2016, that you're going to find resources and champions who can help you to figure this out. The Vera Institute can also help you. You can always reach out to me if this is something that you're struggling with, or you just want some advice about how to get started. And I will say, despite what may feel like a difficult period, kind of in the last couple of months federally, this program continues to have support, and we're continuing to see programs get approved. At this moment, all of the Second Chance Pell schools, so those like 150 plus schools, they're all nearing the step where they would be going to the Department of Education and getting their approval and being able to kind of transition into this new federal framework, which is very exciting. So we're, I think in the last time we were able to do a count, there were something like 40,000 students who had been able to enroll. It's a wonderful number, and we hope that it will kind of go up and up and up. So that's kind of all the good stuff about how we got from Pell being created to the elimination of eligibility and now back to eligibility. And I know there's some anxiety based on conversations I've had around what's happening in this moment federally with the second Trump administration. So I can say a little bit about that, and then I'd love to turn to Q&A. So right now, there are a couple of things that we at Vera and some of our partners nationwide are keeping our eyes on in terms of federal legislation and are preparing to take action as needed. The big thing is the budget reconciliation bill that is moving through Congress. It's been in the news this week because it just passed an important vote yesterday, somehow late night or something like that. It was very recent. It was being reported on today. So you probably saw some things, headlines in the news, that the bill was moving forward. And the goal from Speaker Johnson is to have the bill passed by Memorial Day. So that's next week. So they're hoping to have some things move pretty quickly. This bill includes a lot of cuts to different kinds of programs. And in the initial announcement about or the directions to the committees in the House about how they should approach the bill, the House Committee on Education and the Workforce was directed to cut $330 billion from the programs that they oversee. Just for context, Pell as a program for everybody, like the whole nationwide program, is about $31 billion. So that kind of led to some anxiety around like, where will they make these cuts? Are there threats to Pell? Are there threats to incarcerated students? That committee released their proposal, which is now kind of moved forward with this most recent procedural vote. And the good news is there was no target put on incarcerated people. So they were not mentioned anywhere in the language that was released as part of the cuts that this committee was proposing. So that's great news. It was something we were a little worried about, not again because there was any particular, movement against incarcerated people, but just because there's often not a lot of people at the table to advocate for incarcerated folks when things like this start to come up. So with no advocates, no champions, you could see where, hey, this is easy. We could kind of get rid of this and no one's going to complain about it. But luckily, that does not appear to be on the table. So that, again, is great news. So the next thing that we're looking at, instead of a direct kind of challenge to Pell eligibility, is how the program changes that have been proposed by that committee will impact incarcerated people, and where there might be a greater impact or a more disproportionate impact on incarcerated people than other students. So that's where we're turning our attention to. And looking to have some conversations, ideally with champions from the first round of advocacy around Pell reinstatement who are still in Congress, to support both continuing to keep incarcerated students out of this conversation, but also to consider the effects of the changes that they're looking to make on this specific population. So there's 2 or 3 things that look to have a potentially large impact. I will say there's one really good thing for incarcerated students, so that's great. That one really good thing is that they're proposing to allow students who have had loans go into default to rehabilitate them twice rather than once. That's good for everybody, but loans in default have proven to be quite a challenge for incarcerated people, both having them at all, which then stalls your ability to be eligible, but then also just the difficulties of both getting your loan rehabilitated from prison and then maintaining the rehabilitated status from prison. And it usually has nothing to do, unfortunately, with the student's interest or capacity to make these small payments on time, and everything to do with the structures of how the payments get made that can kind of result in 2 payments in 1 month instead of 1 in each month, which would allow the loan to remain in good stead. So just kind of allowing a bit more opportunity for people to do that process twice if they need to is generally a good thing. So that's like the one good thing coming out of the bill. Um, there are two pieces that kind of work together to create a potential challenge to incarcerated students, which is this proposal to raise the the definition of a full-time student from 12 credits to 15 credits per term. Um, and that in itself doesn't necessarily have a huge impact on incarcerated students because very few people are going full-time in prison. It's just scheduling that's extremely difficult to do. The problem comes where, so they're saying to be full-time, you have to do 15 credits. And then they're saying at the bottom end of enrollment intensity, we're going to make everybody who's enrolled less than half-time ineligible. So you would not be able to get a Pell Grant if you enrolled less than half-time, but they're raising what the full-time measurement is, so that raises what the half-time measurement is. So if it's 15 credits, then you're saying 7.5 credits qualify as a half-time enrollment, and it's hard to add up college credits to 7.5 credits. They're usually in 3-credit bunches, so you're probably talking about a 9-credit enrollment for a part-time student. Administering that many courses for people in prison is challenging. Most people, from what we have observed, are enrolled part-time. 1 to 2 classes, I would say, is more typical than 3 in a term. So that could have a big impact on kind of like who maintains eligibility should this bill pass with the proposals in it the way they are currently presented. So that's one thing we're keeping our eye on. And then the other one, which has kind of an impact that it's hard to estimate what it will be, and I'm hopeful that some higher ed policy think tank will do some kind of estimate because I think this is much more in their wheelhouse than ours. But a proposal to change the maximum Pell Award from a set amount, which is what it is right now. It's like I think it's about $7,800 this year. It tends to change every year, go up with the cost of enrollment. So rather than saying every student who's eligible for maximum Pell is eligible for the set amount by Congress, they would be saying the maximum award is going to be tied to the median cost of this program that the student is enrolling in as it is delivered by every college that offers it in the country. So that's quite a complicated calculation to make. And you could see where, like some of the arguments I've seen have been like, this could be good for community colleges because if it's a program offered by a community college and a baccalaureate institution, then it would pull the Pell Grant up potentially, make it a higher rate for a student who's kind of than the maximum for a student who would be enrolled at the community college. So it could be good, but it's more likely to have a very complicated impact because you could see Pell Grants that are a maximum of, I don't know, $5,000 for a student doing one kind of program, but $10,000 for a student that's doing a different kind of program. And just the questions around like, how does that median even get calculated, are very complicated. So that one, it seems like it would create a lot of chaos in higher ed in general in terms of tuition and fees. But it's a little bit unclear exactly like how would that work in a prison setting? Like, would it be different than for other people? And we're not 100% clear on that. And then there's a bunch of other changes that I invite you to look into. There's some great summaries out there about what it contains, especially actually coming directly from the House Committee on Education and the Workforce. They released some really useful summaries of the policies, and you can go to their website and look at that document and see what it is that's in there. There's also a proposal for short-term Pell, which has been kind of percolating in the national conversation for some time. I know when I speak with some folks who are deeply invested in college and prison, there's often some anxiety around would short-term Pell kind of like pull the attention of departments of corrections towards more workforce-oriented programs or short-term programs and decrease their interest in running longer programs like bachelor's degrees. Just in my first look at how the policy is laid out, it doesn't look very compatible with prison. So if it stays the way it is, we'd have to really think through like how would this work in a prison setting, but it doesn't seem terribly feasible to implement in prisons because there's pieces around like the student who graduates has to be enrolled in the career that they trained for within 180 days. And so if you're thinking about like completing a program, completing a sentence, and getting a job, like being able to keep those numbers up just might not be logistically possible for a prison-based program. So we'll see what comes of that, but that is also in there, and you may hear some folks talking about it. So that's where we are. That's where we are right now federally. Again, this bill is looking, Speaker Johnson is looking to have it pass the House by next week, Memorial Day. There was some talk of a 4th of July deadline, perhaps for the full bill to be decided. So for the negotiations between the Senate and the House to be complete and for an agreed on bill to be able to be passed and signed by then. From what we understand, the leadership of the Senate gave very different directions to their committees about how to approach cuts and budgeting. So we may see big discrepancies between what the House has proposed and passed and then what the Senate proposes. And what that will bring out is debate and negotiation around where these things land ultimately. And so what we intend to be doing, and we invite anyone who's interested in and has the capacity to participate in any kind of advocacy to reach out, because what we're looking to do is to ensure, again, that incarcerated students' interests are represented in these debates and that, first of all, they don't get targeted in general. That's kind of like the first barrier to overcome, and we're there right now, but there's still the Senate bill to see how that works out. So we don't want to see incarcerated students mentioned anywhere. We want them to be able to continue just as a regular group of Pell eligible students. And then the second piece is to think about like, where would it be helpful to raise up the impact of these programs on incarcerated students, where it would be different from or more intensified than students in the community. And I'd be happy to talk with anybody about that. So I'd love to open it up for questions or conversation. I know we have a small but mighty group today. So Judith or Mickey, if you have any directions you'd like to take us in.
Yes, I do have a question. You mentioned that, well, I have so many questions. I wrote so many notes, but one of the things that just stood out real quick is that you mentioned that they may be considering, like the short-term Pell and the workforce and whatnot in the requirements. From my experience, and I'm speaking from federal, right? Because I was incarcerated federally for a decade. From my experience, part of their assessment for recidivism includes the level of degree of education, not the work experience. So, it would be in a sense, they would have to change how they collect the data if they were to go in that route. So what are your thoughts on that? Because that's how they measure the recidivism based on your education level, not on your work experience level.
Yeah, so short-term Pell, let me first explain regular Pell, short-term Pell, and that might help to understand the distinction. So regular Pell, there's kind of like only certain post-secondary programs are eligible for Pell, and they have to have a certain length. It's something like they have to be a year long. It's like odd, like the technical ways that it's counted is strange because there's like clock hours and credits and different things, but it's essentially like a year program could be eligible for Pell. What short-term Pell would open up are programs that are 1 semester or shorter to be eligible for a Pell Grant. So currently, a lot of those programs are already offered through other means like Department of Labor funds. In prison, sometimes we see them paid for by the Corrections Department. So like you could see something as, I think it would be hard to administer, but like something as short term as a forklift training could theoretically become Pell eligible, even though that's like so brief, it would probably not be worth doing the federal paperwork to make it happen. But those kinds of programs where you see they're like 1 month or 2 month intensive, kind of like a welding, sprint kind of thing. those could be eligible for Pell if the program gets approved as one of these like short-term Pell eligible programs. What I was talking about with like the workforce qualification, so that's like a so much like the way I was describing all the regulations that relate to Pell eligibility for incarcerated students, this bill reads as if Congress is setting up another kind of special Pell eligibility program that would require the college to like complete a couple of steps to get Pell eligibility for their short-term program and then to maintain it. So to get it, they would have to be offering a program that is in demand within the state, and it's an interesting structure. They're looking to like pull in governors to participate in that, which is kind of not a typical arrangement that I've seen before, but it seems, interesting to kind of like sign off on like, yes, this is a field, this is a classification of workers that we need more of. So I agree. So you kind of get approval to run your Pell eligible program. And then there's like performance measures attached to it in order to maintain that eligibility, which would include things like this person is employed in the field that they were trained in by a certain time. So it's all kind of this part of it, at least that I'm talking about, is about how do you have that eligibility as a college or a trainer of whatever sort to administer a Pell Grant. And I think if I'm understanding what you're talking about is about on the DOC side or the BOP side, how are they tracking their outcomes? And that would not necessarily play into what would make a program eligible for Pell or not. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I was just worried that, they don't have a measure of, program measures to ensure that that is geared towards recidivism reduction.
Yeah.
Like do with the, with the level of educational degrees. So
Yes, and I want to be clear that like the short-term Pell is not aimed at incarcerated people. It's for the whole field. And so when I'm thinking about like how would this work in a prison setting? And I hear what you're raising about like, well, it kind of might mess up how other things are measured already.
or at least would have to add some type of, incorporation to ensure that we get the results that are necessary to, show that it's a good fit.
Absolutely.
And it's necessary. I don't know, Kelly, I'm sorry, we haven't given you an opportunity to speak. So if you wanna let us know who you are, where you're calling from, and if you have any questions, that'd be great to give you some time.
Yeah, excuse me. Thanks for having me. My name is Kelly Olson. I'm policy manager at Civil Survival. We're an organization in Washington State. And although we're not focused solely on higher ed, I also serve on the board for the Freedom Education Project Puget Sound, as well as the Husky Post Prison Pathways. So I have a lot of connections in the higher ed, and was a little more involved when the we were first fighting for the Pell Grants, and then kind of had some conflicts in my schedule, and so I haven't been participating very much for a while. So had an opening and thought I would jump in. So Ruth, I really appreciate the updates. I didn't necessarily have any specific questions right now, just trying to be a little bit more involved in the higher ed space.
You
I have
guys
a quick
do
question.
some great work in that state, by the way. So keep it up.
I had a quick question for you. We have we're obviously a coalition force, and we understand that a lot of people watch this afterwards, and a lot of people are advocating and specifically helping people that are currently system impacted. So I guess my question would be, how would you advocate, or what role can directly impacted individuals or those advocacies play in helping Vera shaping how these Pell implementations can evolve within states and institutions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think like the best thing that anyone can do who has gotten to go to a college program in prison or after, who has a conviction, a history is to, go out in the world, live your life, and be successful. when there is kind of the opportunity and the person is willing to speak about their experience, I think, taking that opportunity and talking about the value of eligibility for these programs in prison, you kind of like can't hear it better from anybody than who actually did it and lived it. So I think, if there are things that are happening at the state level, opportunities to speak with your representative, to connect with your college on the advocacy that they might be doing. You might have multiple colleges that you're an alum of who have, been in relationship with you in different ways throughout your journey. And finding ways to like reconnect with the leadership there to say like, hey, I'm doing great, and I would love to talk about what I've been up to. If you have any need for that or opportunity for that, that's the kind of thing that, these like last minute requests come through all the time where it's like, hey, this legislator, from such and such a place would really like to hear about the impact. And then that kind of gets filtered down to the college director, and the college director is like, okay, who do I have who could like get on the phone today to talk to this legislator? So kind of like making yourself known, that you're interested and available and you want to speak on your experience, is hugely valuable. A lot of it, like I said, happens in these kind of strange last minute arrangements. And so like signaling it in advance can be like an extremely useful step.
Thank you so much. There's a lot of great advice there.
And Ruth is, it just brings me to also, and as you know, and I think we've spoken about it briefly, is like one of our roles is heading Unlock Higher Education in that direction, to have people on the ground to see, bring into the community what is happening in their area so that we can have a space and a place where everybody can come and speak of those concerns, and then have people like, Vera, like you, that are have that expertise in that space, train them, let them know this is what you can do. This is how you can go out there and advocate. This is how you can, because we, number one, don't want to hurt what's already been done, but with number two, we don't want to lose what's already been done. And so I think information dissemination is extremely important. And that's why we are looking at creating this collaborative, so that we can have everybody coming together and be informed and be at the same page, so that when we are out there, we know what to say, we know how to say it, when to say it, who to say it with, and in what format, because that today is extremely important.
Yeah. So I think, a lot of the messages that resonated the last time around, and when we did the campaign for Pell reinstatement, we went so far as to do kind of like formal political message testing to try to figure out like what would be the thing that works. A lot has changed about American culture, I would say, since 2016, which is when we were beginning this work. So we don't know, we haven't gone back and tested again to find out if these messages still resonate. But they tend to be kind of evergreen with a bipartisan grouping, which is kind of like this makes people safer, not just the people in the community through recidivism, but the people who live and work in prison too. And we need to care about them. That it saves money. Because when someone goes home and gets a job and is able to live their life in freedom, they're going to not be in prison, and they're going to be paying taxes and participating in that state and the national economy. Another big piece is that, almost all jobs in the United States at this point require some kind of post-secondary training, certainly the jobs that pay a living wage. And that people in prison have generally a much lower level of kind of like maximum education because, again, they're not given access, not because there's not interest, but because there's not access. So having these programs available, every kind of post-secondary program prepares you for a job. And so these programs are a great jobs pathway for people who are leaving prison. And then the last piece is really that like the cost of administering a Pell Grant is pretty low. If you're talking about the cost of incarceration, which could be, over $100,000 a year, and a Pell Grant, which is less than $8,000 a year, your return on investment when you're administering these programs can be huge. So you have to, pay up front to have the program happen, but it's well worth it for the kind of outcomes that you're going to be getting. So those are the kinds of things that we tend to see, come up when we're talking with legislators that are both kind of more liberal and more conservative. And then I think when you want to get to know the person and the positions that they have if you're speaking with a specific legislator, specific kind of voice, and to think about what kinds of examples would resonate the best with this person. And usually someone who's in a public office is going to have a lot of that stuff front and center in terms of what they care about and what they're committed to. So you can read their materials, figure out what it is that is going to connect to them. And the point isn't to kind of like do something sneaky. The point is to show them why their interests and your interests are the same. To say, hey, I know you care about infrastructure in the state, and can I tell you about the welding program that we're running in the prison, or how I'm a welder because I got trained that way. You're just looking for alignment so that you're kind of speaking the same language with the people that you're connecting with.
Great points. Thank you for, highlighting those. Definitely is going to be part of our training that we hope to do. And we hope that you guys will be involved in as well. Again, I think it's a moment for all of us to come together to be able to disseminate that message in the best way that is going to be received possible, right? Those are definitely valuable points. And again, Ruth, I want to thank you for this conversation. And oh my goodness, I wrote so many notes, but I also loved the history that you put on there, which is extremely important because we need to also understand where we're coming from, how hard this has been, to push on to the level that it is today. And that's even more important as to why we don't want to take steps back and we want to continue forward, but we want to continue forward informed so that we don't have unintended consequences in our movement. So again, thank you so much. Appreciate you. And thank you for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And I so respect the work that Unlock Higher Ed does and the community that you have here. So I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with your membership.
Thank you. All right. Bye, everybody.